Hello, my name is Matthew, and a while ago, Noah from Everyone Who Reads It Must Converse had a great video discussion of perfect novels. And Noah talks about it and then shows a few books that he considers to be perfect. And it was great fun. I really enjoyed watching it and thinking about it. And I spent several days trying to think of what I would consider to be a perfect novel, and then what actually is a perfect novel. And I think in casual conversation, we might say that this is one of the best novels, or this is one of my favorite novels, or this is a perfect novel. And in some ways, those terms can be interchangeable. If you really think about it, there's pretty significant differences between those three. You can have a novel that you would say is the best. If you think of an author that you really like, there might be what you consider to be the author's best novel, but then there might be another that is your favorite. You can see the flaws in it, but it just matches your sensibilities a little bit more. Perfection seems to be a wholly different kind of conversation. The idea that something has been done perfectly, and what is a perfect novel. And it sort of has to be a novel. If we were talking about nonfiction, it doesn't make any sense to talk about what is a perfect biography or a perfect book of world history or a certain war. And I would think that if you think of the novel, it probably makes even more sense to tighten the constraints on what we're talking about, as in qualifying it in some way. So it might be easier to talk about the perfect murder mystery, or the perfect thriller, or the perfect fantasy novel, to get those bounds a little bit tighter. To just say the perfect work of literature with the big L doesn't. It became very difficult for me to think of what sort of terms would I be using. In fact, I probably more. I think the idea of perfection is probably more suitable for the creator, as an author of fiction or any discipline, music or the visual arts, culinary arts, any sort of discipline. I've had that feeling as a painter, and it makes sense that you would start with having an interest in something that turns into a hobby, that turns into a really serious part of your life, and then finally into potentially a life of creating works of arts. And through that progression, you would imagine that your standards become higher and higher. You're ideally getting better. You're creating a body of work. You're learning what your tools are, what you're good at, what you're not very good at, what you're not interested in, and coming up with ideas. And there's no better feeling than having an idea and then executing it and thinking, that's exactly what I imagined. And as your standards get higher, that becomes basically impossible. you might have it in the moment, whereas you're doing something that's perfect, and you look at it years later with a clear set of eyes and just know that it's not. So I was sort of thinking about that. Now, if I had to pick a perfect novel, I picked one, and for the modern novel, I'll say Madame Bovary by Gustav Flaubert. I'm at a disadvantage. This is a translation. I'm reading Lydia Davis's translation of Flaubert. I'm basically setting all of that aside. I've read the English translation. I don't really know what it's like to read the original French, but it does everything perfectly. It's a domestic drama that feels incredibly relatable and bigger. So it's a very small personal story that has those larger meanings when you can think about those small little details that are just entirely relatable to anybody. It's cynical and sympathetic. It's very serious and funny. It's well observed, but lopes along. The pacing is perfect. The plot, the characters, how it begins, how it all wraps up, the length, just a perfect length novel. Again, this is mostly me saying this is what I think is one of the best books. This is one of my favorite books. Now, I don't really know how I would make a list of my of perfect books. So the idea of perfection, and then I would hold up a number 2. It seems to kind of contradict the spirit of what we're talking about. So the second most perfect book. So this is my pick for a novel that is perfect. It got me thinking, though. I think about how so many of my books are decidedly, so many of my favorite books are decidedly imperfect, which makes a lot of sense. These are human creations, and everybody has their little bag of tools, and they work with what they have. And so if you're naturally long-winded, you might have a long-winded book. If you're a very terse person, you'll have a shorter, more concise book, and on and on and on. There's great books, I feel like, are idiosyncratic. It's the voice of a person, that really personal, internal moment in your mind where all the creativity is pouring out. There's no universal platonic ideal of what a novel is. We're just matching up sensibilities and great storytelling. And so I have a couple of my favorite novels that have imperfections that work for the book. It's what makes them great. And so I've Don Quixote by Cervantes, and it's an extremely idiosyncratic book. It's a comedy and a tragedy at the same time. We have this Don Quixote character reads all these books of knights of chivalry and goes insane, starts running around Spain, having mishaps. But there's decisions that are really hard to wrap your head around, especially with modern day sensibilities of what a novel should be. There's a point where there's a priest that tells a story, and then we read the story at full length, and it's like 100 pages long. The big story just stops, and then we have a novella, a story within the book, which is just an odd thing to do. It's experimental. Part two of Don Quixote, we hear that there were sequels being written about the first Don Quixote, and it's addressed in the book. And so it's sort of like this meta fiction, where we're talking about the book and then actually talking about the publication of the book outside of the book. Very odd. Works perfectly. Dead Souls by Gogol, one of my favorite books. And it almost doesn't even have a plot. It's this guy that shows up to a small Russian village wanting to buy the dead serfs, the servants of the landlords. They have these dead servants that they still have to pay taxes on, and this mysterious person that wants to buy them for some reason, and all of the crazy consequences that come out of that. And so it's just a series of situational set pieces. It's amazing. I love it. As far as, by any standard, what you would think of when you think of a novel, it doesn't quite match. Meanwhile, Gogol considered this to be a poem, which is a whole other bag of worms. The Karamazov Brothers by Dostoevsky, which I've made no secret of my fondness and admiration of this book. But it has a long introduction. It takes a long time for this book to catch traction. Upon rereading, I find that I really do love the beginning of it, but part of an author's job is to pull you in, to have you be entertained on page one, not spend 200 pages just explaining who the characters are. Dostoevsky is verbose and takes his time, and he makes it work for himself. There's a moment in this book. It's the night of the crime. Dmitri is at Fyodor's house, and we find out that his father is dead. And I've never talked to anybody that read that part that didn't think that the pages got stuck together, that they missed something entirely. They had to go back and reread the whole portion because it seems like a part of the story has been excised. Now, it's a device that Dostoevsky was doing in order to implant the mystery element. Was it done as well as it could have been done? Probably not. As it goes along, you get over it, you realize that you haven't missed anything, and the book is great. But there's a moment where Dostoevsky has a rare misstep. Toilers of the Sea by Victor Hugo. Sort of a grand, it's a maritime adventure story, which I just love. But Victor Hugo has a habit of going on digressions and just having full-blown essays side by side with the story, and it's nearly Victor Hugo having to stop and go, well, anyway, back to what I was saying. And he makes it work. It's fantastic reading and getting the historical elements, and this has like a whole preface about the archipelago channel, and you can see it in how Victor Hugo writes in Les Miserables with the famous chapters on the sewer system, and The Man Who Laughs, with all the chapters on lineages, and of course The Hunchback of Notre Dame, with all the descriptions of Paris and Notre Dame. It's clunky though. You have to go back and forth between the story and the essay portions. It's how Victor Hugo thought and talked and what he wanted to do, and he makes it work. So, The Castle by Franz Kafka. I don't know why I picked this. I have a couple editions, but it says on the spine. As imperfect as a novel can get. It's unfinished. It basically has no plot. Underdeveloped characters. We just have this nightmarish scenario, a premise of somebody showing up for a job to work at a castle, and he just never gets into the castle. He just goes around in circles in this impossible, absurd situation. And it's plotting and dreary and nihilistic, depressing, doesn't go anywhere, and yet I love it. It's fascinating. It's hilarious. If you can get on the wavelength, just maybe get one chuckle out of you on a page, it'll start building. And a whole different idea of what it's like to read a novel comes out. And for my reading tastes, it's a fragmented premise for a story that's way too long, even for what it is being unfinished, that just works, and I love it. So this is just a list of books, novels that are imperfect and I love. So let me know what you think. I'll leave links to Noah's channel. It's a great discussion. So let me know what you think. Leave a comment if you would like. And thank you for watching. Take care.